I'm Gabby, this is Shaziya. We both work for Confluence Cloud. And I know you're thinking, these people work for Confluence, so of course they're gonna be really biased. And I get it because we love Confluence, like really, really love Confluence. But we're also users of Confluence, and we understand that having everything in one place can be really challenging. It can get unruly and ineffective quickly and become a nightmare to manage. We also know getting started isn't the most intuitive if you're new to the tool. But not only are we both Confluence lovers, but Shaziya is an expert in user experience, and today we're gonna show you how to tie UX principles and human behavior into managing your Confluence site.
Thank you. So our customer feedback channels tell us that some of the common words you all use to describe content management and collaboration at scale are cost redundant, admin heavy, reactive. Look, knowledge is not a static thing. We all know it evolves over time. And finding and maintaining that knowledge in a company is never easy. And it's a universal problem which doesn't really depend on the tool. Like whether you use Confluence, Notion, Docs, old school paper and files, the pain points persist anywhere that you organize knowledge.
So in addition to these pain points that we've heard from you, we also get lots of specific questions for Confluence, things like, should this be a new space? And while we can't always give you a clear yes or no because every team is really different, we can help you build and manage a site that meets your specific needs, but is flexible enough to scale with your organization. So we're gonna cover quite a bit in this session, and at times it's gonna feel like we've gone off the rails, but I promise you it all comes together in the end. We're gonna do a brief overview of Confluence for anyone who's new to the tool, and then we'll dig into the psychology behind building a great user experience. We're gonna cover how to apply UX principles to your needs and which Confluence features can help you do that. And then we've got real examples to walk through at the end and time for questions as well.
All right, so let's back up a bit and review what the different elements of Confluence are and how they were intended to be used. Your Confluence site is a remote-friendly team workspace. That workspace has different content types. What you're seeing here is obviously a page, but there are also blog posts, and now we have whiteboards. All these content types are stored in spaces, which is an area to keep all of your content organized.
And then macros, integrations, and smart links make Confluence even more powerful and convenient. So you can think of macros like shortcuts that allow you to add extra functionality or include dynamic content on your Confluence pages. This could be as simple as adding a table of contents or something more complicated like embedding a Jira roadmap to your page. In a dream world, we would never have to use or pay for multiple software tools, but we know that that'll never be the case. So with native integrations with popular tools, you can continue to use all the tools that work for you. And lastly, smart links provide a view into other tools, so showing assignees, status, previews, and even direct access to other content without having to open yet another tab. You can always share knowledge and collaborate across many tools that work for you with the confidence that Confluence is your single source of truth. Now, a lot of people think of Confluence as this static place to drop documentation from Jira, but it can be so much more. And it's easy to think about it in 3 buckets. So first, you can have that single source of truth for all of your work that promotes an open culture. So you have company-wide visibility, organization, and alignment. When collaborating on a project, you can kickstart and maintain team collaboration with everything from actionable meeting notes to inspiring project plans, no matter where the team is in the world. And lastly, you can easily collaborate on work, learnings, and share other information across the organization so everyone stays in the loop. So enough gushing about Confluence, there's a lot of potential, but how do you actually realize the possibilities? It's especially daunting when it looks like this to start. So how do you go from this to this? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, it's gonna take some work, but the payoff is worth it. So I work in marketing. I was painfully acquainted with a tool called Marketo, a marketing automation platform. Is anyone familiar with it? Yeah, a couple people? Okay. Details aren't super important, but it's basically insanely powerful. You can automate anything that happens in a sales or marketing workflow, but I was introduced to it like this. Not like super inspiring. So our running joke was that it was like this black hole because we didn't know where anything went when we added components. It was this blank slate that we could organize however we wanted, but we didn't know what to do with it. And yes, they had best practices, like a lot of SaaS tools, but everyone was using it in a different way. So we couldn't find things, we weren't sure which campaigns were running, and we definitely couldn't troubleshoot when something inevitably went wrong. So rightfully so, leaders at our organization weren't super thrilled that we were spending all this money on a tool that we couldn't really explain, and it seemed that it was more trouble than it was worth. But once we got together as a team and we started to really map out our team goals and our current processes, it was so much easier for us to build that foundation in Marketo. And it was something that was accessible and practical for our team. But it still allowed us to use the automation capabilities to power our team. So it went from this black hole to the center of our new universe. And it was because we had these repeatable processes and a scalable infrastructure that allowed us to quickly automate these new workflows, and it just became second nature to us. The blank slate, while scary, was wholly customizable and what we needed. We didn't have to fit our programs into the box of some of the simpler tools. So I say all of that to show you that it's not just Confluence, but when you have a tool that's very powerful and it can be or do a lot of things for your company, it's not just going to magically solve your problems. You really have to define your intentions for the tool and make sure your needs and requirements are clear if you want to be set up for success. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, it starts by recognizing that you're never just asking someone to use a new tool, you're asking them to change the way that they work. Luckily for you, I took my required semester of psychology in college, so I know that whether for personal or business situations, a lot of company, team, and even individual needs are rooted in human psychology. So for software, that translates to user experience.
User experience, or UX, is often thought about in terms of customer experience, how people outside of your company navigate your app or website. But those same experiences can apply to your employees and your teammates too, isn't it? So understanding the behaviors of people that you work with can help you more effectively use the tools to get shit done. Now, there are several behavior patterns that can impact users' experiences with a product, but we'll look at a few of these that are most relevant to Confluence. That's attention, memory, and influence. So even the sharpest person you know cannot possibly notice everything that's going on around them. We cannot focus our attention on a lot of things at once because our brains will automatically filter out anything that doesn't seem useful. If I asked you to identify the number of groups in this image, raise your hand if you think the number of groups are 4. And keep your hands raised. For the remaining folks, raise your hand if you think the number of groups are 3. Okay, so majority of you all think it's either 3 or 4. Okay, hands down. If instead I showed you this image, your answer would most likely be 2, isn't it? So what makes us think that some objects belong to the same group? It's the principle of common region, which emerged from the 20th century work by Gestalt psychologists in Austria and Germany, which says that items within a boundary are perceived as a group and assumed to share some common characteristics or functionality. In the first image I showed you, it was proximity which caused the middle 2 circles to appear grouped together. However, in the second image, adding boundaries changes that perception of grouping, and it separates the middle 2 circles regardless of their proximity. Similarly, common region also overpowers similarity. When you add a common background, it holds elements together and makes us perceive them as related, even if they are different in shape. Human memory is limited and it's imperfect. The limits of human memory will affect people's ability to process information, and it shapes the way that information is stored over a long period of time. So let's do another simple task of recognizing and collecting related words. Think about what comes to your mind when I say the words spangled drongo. I see a lot of confused faces in the crowd, but that's natural because most of us are unaware of the characteristics of a spangled drongo. We've probably never heard or even seen what it is. But if instead I said the words spangled drongo bird, your brain would recognize words associated with bird and come up with words like wings, feather, beak, etc. So what your mind did in the above task is the perfect example of recognition and recall. They are the 2 types of memory retrieval, and recognition is much easier than recall. The main difference between recognition and recall is that recognition has more cues, and memory retrieval becomes easier by the cues that we receive from our context. So interfaces that promote recognition will always give users extra help in remembering that information. Users also take cues from other humans. If many others like or do something, that makes people think that this must be a good thing. Social proof is a psychological phenomenon where people reference the behaviors of others to guide their own behavior. And the liking principle shows us that people prefer to say yes to individuals and organizations that they know and like. The same goes for websites and for user interfaces. So social proof and liking principle are two of the 6 influencing principles that are detailed in Dr. Robert Cialdini's book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. This was first published in 1984, and as a psychology professor, Cialdini and his students conducted numerous research studies to identify and prove these principles. For example, if someone is at a gala for the first time, it's natural for them to observe their surroundings to ensure they're fitting in and acting the way everyone would expect them to act. A classic example of the liking principle is the old-fashioned Tupperware party with jewelry or wine tasting as its modern counterparts. Let me tell you a little story. So in the late 1940s, Tupperware began to organize these demonstration parties, and by 51, the products were no longer even offered at retail outlets because the parties had generated far more sales. Now, why is that? People invited to these parties bought the containers not always because they needed or wanted them, it's because they liked the host. They wanted her party to succeed. And with technology, warming people with pictures and descriptions of real people, sharing historical information to remind users of their familiarity and comfort. These are just some examples of liking techniques in action.
So earlier I talked about this dream Confluence state, how it can be everything from your knowledge base to project collaboration, project planning, and knowledge management. And while I hope that inspired you, I definitely understand if that's not your intention for the tool. However you do choose to use Confluence, though, it's important that you're clear on the pain points that you're trying to solve and your intentions for Confluence. This is important for a few reasons, but the biggest reason is that Confluence, or really any other tool, is not going to be successful if everyone is on different pages. So Shaziya touched upon the limits of our attention and our memory. We've probably all been in a situation like this. The number of applications, or for me, the number of tabs that are open, exceed the computing power of your device. And it slows down or even crashes. And we all know that little spinning wheel. So your brain works the same way. We have a finite amount of mental resource that we can devote to any given task. Once that amount is met or exceeded, we tend to get overwhelmed and maybe even give up. And yet, the average company uses about 75 different tools. So while Confluence can integrate with all of these tools, if it's not clear when and why to use Confluence and people still have to look 12 different places for information, Confluence just becomes another place that people have to check, and it's not a tool that they trust and adopt, it's really just a hassle. Okay, so my question's a little easier than the Spangled Drongo one. I want you to think about how much time you spend thinking about your mail, like your physical mail, not email. Got it? You know how much time you spend? Okay. But what if the mailman dropped your mail around your neighborhood instead? You'd probably have a really hard time finding it. All your neighbors would now have access to your mail, and you'd probably spend a little bit more time thinking about it. But we all know that our mail is delivered to a safe, defined place where we have the key. So it's something we don't even really bother thinking about. I can confidently say I have very little mental capacity dedicated to thinking about my mail, so I get to spend more time on important things like hanging out with all of you guys in Vegas. So if you can create that defined, intentional, and secure space in Confluence for your teams, you can remove that mental load of finding information or collaborating so teams can focus on the work that matters. So these are some of the common pain points that Confluence can help with. And they work at the project level, team level, individual level, org level, and you can obviously have more than one. So for example, if your pain is you're having a really hard time finding information, your intention can be that Confluence becomes that single source of truth for documentation. So everything from company documentation, a public knowledge base, articles, or even project plans. All though with a maintained information architecture. If your pain is managing access, or permissions across multiple tools, then your intention can be that regardless of whether that information is shared across internal teams, external teams, or within teams, Confluence becomes a place where everyone has access to the information that they need in one place. So unlike some of the other tools with disconnected pages that are floating around. And if you're struggling with keeping information up to date, you can make Confluence a living library instead of a graveyard for content. And if you struggle with moving work forward across multiple tools, your intention for Confluence can be to make it a hub of knowledge with integrations across all of your other tools.
All right, so that brings us to the crux of this session, which is how might we apply those UX principles to your Confluence site structure and match with your intentions. So when your intention is to have Confluence be your single source of knowledge where everyone has access to the information they need, it's important to structure content in groupings that make navigation intuitive. As we saw earlier, the principle of common region tells us that people perceive items within a container as related, regardless of any other characteristics. Now, that container in Confluence could be a space, or it could be a page. And some best practices for space structure are, one, to ensure naming conventions of spaces and pages are extremely clear. As a simple example, if you have a new team member and they're invited to a space that's titled Sales-Corporate Team, that's much more explanative than just the title corporate. The second tip is to keep your content structure as flat as possible. A quick rule of thumb is to not have more than 6 levels of pages within your structure, because a flat page structure will be more efficient for organizing your content and less frustrating for your users to navigate through. More restricted content should live at a higher page level. This is because view restrictions on a page are inherited, which means a restriction applied to one page will cascade down to any child pages. So your sensitive, confidential content should be in a page that's towards the top of your page structure so that it can remain more private. Moving on to the intention of having Confluence be the living place for content as it scales, recognition rather than recall is all about minimizing the user's memory load by making information visible or easily retrievable when needed. So when applying this principle to the way content is presented in Confluence, some key tips to keep in mind are give more visual cues to your users. Let them recognize the information in the interface rather than having to remember or to recall it. Again, another simple example is emojis in the page title allow content to be better distinguished both in the space sidebar as well as the page's home. Offer help in context. Using the search macro in the space overview is one way to achieve this. And finally, be intentional about decluttering your page tree by removing outdated content. It needs to be a part of your team's routine, so encourage and promote the archive efforts of your space gardeners. Social proof and the liking principle of UX tell us that trust is foundational to all relationships, including the relationships that people have with their software tools. It's important for Confluence content to establish that credibility and win users' trust so that there's a long-term relationship ensuring work is continuing to move forward. That translates to a high number of interactions can both increase the credibility of a page and it can encourage adoption or following. In the home feed, there's a Discover What's Happening section, and popularity of content there is determined by interactions like comments and reactions. So in other words, different public-facing metrics are one social proof technique. And in this post-pandemic, remote-first way of working with teams, it can be difficult to forge new connections or even maintain old ones with teammates. So having a people directory in each space's overview is a way to promote familiarity within teams.
Cool. So let's take a few minutes and we'll go through a couple examples that are based on real customer use cases. So keep in mind, some of the features I'm going to mention are paid features. If you're new to Confluence, we do have a free edition, but for more advanced use cases, we're going to cover some of our paid features. All right, so we're going to be talking about a 25-year-old company that needed better visibility, higher productivity, and they wanted to focus on innovation. But 2/3 of the team that they were working with were actually external partners, vendors, or contractors. So they knew that they needed a more open, collaborative approach with these outside vendors that would help them achieve their goals, but that expansive community, while it helps them innovate and work more flexibly, it also makes tracking and planning and security a little bit more complex. They wanted all of their vendors to work together, in one platform so they could track milestones and see a collective view of their work with keeping sensitive information confidential. So they needed a secure place for everybody to work, long-term scalability, a central knowledge base, and a training hub. So matching those intentions and pain points to the UX principles, specifically the principle of common region. A secure place for everyone to work can be done in 2 ways, depending on your preferences and your use case, but I'll show you both since we're keeping this one just a little bit more general. So with Confluence Enterprise, you can have unlimited sites with centralized user management. So if you have more long-term engagements with specific partners, require different security clearance, or even just operate totally separate divisions of your organization, then this would be the way to go. However, on all of our paid plans, we now have single space guests. So guests will get access to just one space, but they can collaborate in that space mostly like a regular user. So unless you have those more advanced requirements that I just mentioned, then this would work as well. So you can set up a new space for each vendor if that's how the work maps, or you can set up a new space for each project. Like I mentioned, each guest only has access to that single space, but they can collaborate within that space, so you can have them edit, view, comment, etc. And we know that starting with a blank space can be a little bit daunting, so, and not everything fits into a perfect box, but applying the principle of recognition rather than recall, we can kind of meet in the middle with some of our out-of-the-box templates and custom templates. So space templates and page templates will go a long way in kickstarting your Confluence journey. Here, that could be as simple as leveraging one of our new space templates that we just launched with pre-configured info to help you get started. But more likely than not, in an example with this much complexity, there'd need to be additional requirements for this project. So here you could actually use automation to add in your own custom templates each time a new project space is created. So after you've created your space, you can then use automation to do things like create meeting notes every week with a certain template. And now that you have this secure place for everybody to work that can be created with consistency in seconds, we can move on to the knowledge base and the training hub. So again, depending on the complexity, this could be a separate site for enterprise users, or it could just be a unique space within your main site. So you can create custom templates for knowledge base or training articles so anybody can spin up new pages efficiently. As a result of standardized pages, it becomes easier for new team members to learn and onboard, leaning into the usability quality component of efficiency. So it's related to the behavioral topic of attention, but it best fits into motivation. People tend to take the path of least resistance when using an interface. So once content is created, tools like the search macro that Shaziya mentioned make it super easy for anyone to find that info without being expert on your site infrastructure. And then bringing back automation, you can then create automated workflows and review processes to make sure that you're, one, identifying outdated content, and then making sure that it goes through the right approval processes without the manual overhead. Then once that's all done, you can use anonymous access to open up your knowledge base and trainings to anyone on the internet. And then additionally, with the new embedded pages, you can actually access, share, and collaborate on those articles within tools like Microsoft Teams and now Jira Service Management. So Shaziya is going to dig in a little more on like the day-to-day of an existing user.
So for this company, let's take one that we've introduced at other Atlassian events, our fictional sneaker company that makes athletic shoes. It's called Neebok. At Neebok, the factory partner sits in Hanoi, while creative and marketing are in LA and New York. In addition to working across these multiple time zones and regions, each team uses a different set of tools to get their work done. This is exactly the kind of situation where teams can struggle to get aligned and to stay on the same page. Neebok has been using Confluence for years, so they are an existing customer, but the adoption is just not there. The R&D team is dedicated to using Confluence because of its deep integration with Jira, but other teams are using Google Docs, sharing assets through Dropbox, estimates are being built in Excel sheets, and more. It's not immediately clear where Confluence fits into the processes that run within their organization. So much like the mail example that Gabby had shared earlier, Confluence becomes just another place to look and manage scattered information. So let's start by uncovering use cases within Neebok's processes so we can figure out their intentions and pain points and where Confluence can fit in. So currently imagine this scenario. You get thrown into a project, maybe your teammates forward a bunch of emails, send you a list of Slack channels or team chat rooms, and toss you over a bunch of files. There you go, just get yourself up to speed. It was hard to know what's already out of date, who's working on what, and how's it going. But with Confluence at the center, anyone jumping into an existing project or something new, everyone can be up to speed and on the same page quickly across all of your tools, whether they're Atlassian or not. We talked about spaces earlier. Team spaces are great for helping everyone understand what the team structure is, what the goals of the team are. But project spaces are also a great place to align cross-functional teams on a single project. Within that project, you can bring all of your teams and their tools to unify the process. Because smart links, which are part of the Atlassian platform, act as windows into work across all Atlassian and third-party products. Smart links reduce cognitive load by providing chunks of information in context. So regardless of where the work happens, whether it's Excel, Trello, Jira, or Confluence, smart links make that work easy to search, edit, and to see across applications. Liking techniques, such as people directories in each team's space overview, can help the new team members get comfortable in Confluence as the main tool. With a simple click into each team member's profile, you can see what else they work on and who they report to. And for the pain point of getting teams on the same page, smart links are helpful, but seeing a calendar view can really put things into perspective. Team calendars connects all of the timelines for the business teams working on the project to the actual tickets for the execution in Jira. With direct integrations with popular calendar tools like Apple, Google, just to name a few, you can even see PTO for the team to make sure things stay on track. It's also a great way to surface high-level timelines for the executive team. Now, within the space type of your choice, the goal is to keep all of your cross-functional partners aligned by having all of the planning documents and deliverables for the project launch. And two of my personal favorite newish features are not only can the teammates see who viewed the content, but with the mentioned users' additional analytics, you can see if the people you've tagged on your page actually viewed the content. So no more starting meetings with, has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? You can just go straight into share out with presenter mode. Now, in this case, the product dev team was working closely to deliver this new product, but the marketing team tracks all campaigns in their campaign space that's shared with their marketing agency. Labels can make it easy for stakeholders to find the information they need across Confluence. For instance, the marketing team needs to know product specs to build creative mockups for their campaign. So within their team space, they can use the labels macro to pull in all the pages related to product specs without having to comb through the product team's pages. So now that this one project is set up for success, it's still, the company has been using Confluence as kind of like a catch-all for all years. And so it's really hard for all the teams to see its value. There are outdated processes flowing around, people have come and gone, historical context has been lost, but they have internal policies that require them to keep planning documents for at least a year for audit purposes. It's great with Confluence, you can make sure the knowledge doesn't leave when the teammates leave, but if no one is managing that process, it can become a nightmare to find the right information. But thankfully now, we can clean things up pretty quickly because automation allows you to first identify which content is past that one-year requirement. So as you see in this rule, the authors can be notified to check if the content is outdated, and then auto-archive it. Because these projects are united by that one-year project requirement, it makes the most sense to continue using a space for each new launch. Because you can easily archive a space so that it's not cluttering your site, but still have access to it throughout that one-year period, keeping the Confluence instance clean and relevant. We can also build some custom templates for onboarding new partners and a template for closing out old projects. And with automation, you can have these templates added automatically anytime a new project launch space is created. And finally, pulling in that social component, the program management team can write a blog to explain the new organization system, making sure everyone is on the same page and feels like they are part of the process. So now the team can focus on building the best product instead of doing the paperwork behind the scenes. And everyone stays on the same page. So I know we've given you a lot to think about, and when you go into office on Monday, we really hope that you feel confident to create and manage a growing Confluence Cloud site with a UX-driven approach. This public page has a summary of all the principles and techniques we covered. There's the QR code for you to scan to get access to that page. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And with that, we're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. On the topics of UX and UI, are there any possibilities of scripting CSS or even something, other scripting languages to customize the look and feel?
Okay, so the question was, are there any other scripting languages, CSS, for example, that can be used to customize the look and feel? I'm not sure about that, to be honest, so I'll have to check with the team. But if you're available after this talk, maybe you can meet us at the booth and we can chat more about that, AC.
Thank you.
Yeah, but Gabby, are you aware of any look and feel?
I do know of some marketplace apps that could possibly help you. I just am not really sure. Maybe we can talk after and just figure out exactly what you're trying to change, and we can see what the right way to do that would be.
Thanks for your presentation, by the way. Thank you very much. You mentioned that you can integrate other tools such as Google Docs and Excel, etc. How do you deal with rights management? So we've got a group of users who are using these tools, and then how does it work, and what challenges have you come across with users doing so?
Yeah, so the examples that we showed with Excel and Google specifically, but it works across all of the other tools, the permissions are inherited from the other tool, so we don't bypass any other permissions. So let's say I'm working on a page where you created a document in Drive that's private and I don't have access to it. I'll see that there's a link there that I don't have access to, but it does not open any content up to anybody who doesn't already have permissions.
When you're integrating things like Excel documents into these Confluence pages, and sometimes Excel documents can have several sheets and all kinds of data like that, is there any way to make it so that when they go, it goes to a specific space and it saves that for the next person, so it makes it so that you don't have to constantly scroll to the right pages or right data, it just automatically shows that specific view?
I don't know that you could do that unless you did it in Excel. So it's picking up exactly what's showing in Excel. So if you opened it, I know that example was like really, really fast, so we could show you more of a live view at the booth. But it's showing whatever is open in Excel. So it's not like customized for each viewer that's on the page. It's just a live view of what's happening in Excel. So if you're on that tab in Excel, that's what it's going to show to the person on the page.
Hi, is there any way to give weight to certain spaces when you're searching over other spaces?
So when you search for, spaces specifically, there's a spaces home, so there's a way to filter out. Like the example I gave earlier, if you use a space for a project launch and then you want to archive it so that it's not cluttering the rest of your Confluence site structure, it'll be visible only in the archived filter in the spaces home. So that's one way to so we have communal, private, archive. Those are ways to filter your view of spaces. But then if you're just searching in the global search of Atlassian products, there is a filter that you can use there for specific spaces. I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question.
Kind of. We want to give our users the ability to search across the entire Confluence instance, but there are certain pages that the teams all know carry a higher weight, that information may be more pertinent. So just being able to bubble those up to the top primarily before the rest of the content.
Got it. I will say too, I don't know if you caught the keynote where they were talking about some of that like machine learning and AI stuff that we're starting to integrate. I do think that that's gonna help with making sure that people are seeing the most relevant content, even personalized for them. So I think that that's definitely something that's going to help, but I don't think that there's a way that you could just say, don't say, show this stuff in searches and only show X, Y, and Z.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I lost my voice. So you introduced space templates. Will it be, or are we able to do custom space templates?
So you can definitely do that with automation, where basically you would build a rule that shows when this space is created with whatever title, or maybe there's something within the title, or it's created by a specific person, or matches whatever conditions, you can have them add in specific pages to build that space for you. So you can use any of our out-of-the-box templates or build your own custom templates and have those populated every time a new space is created.
Okay, but I can't like do a custom homepage for the space?
Not right now, but it's on the roadmap.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes. I think there were these two.
I'm a big fan of Confluence mobile app, especially when using it on handheld, right? It's a very constricted view, so I was curious, do you have any specific recommendations if I'm working within a team who's accessing pages a lot through mobile, just different design choices that I should make to make sure they're really accessible in that viewport?
Yeah, that's a great question. On mobile, of course, as you mentioned, the screen, real estate is much smaller. So if you have a lot of teammates that you know are specifically referencing articles that way, there's so much that you can do with your content. Again, the way like you structure it, we have a lot of macros and just general widgets in pages that you could use. So having proper dividers, having proper like hierarchy of even like the font, the way it's displayed. But when you're fighting for real estate, it's really about making sure that the content is as kind of tight as possible. Yeah, in the case of mobile, it's really about the limited real estate. So I would say play around with a lot of the widgets that are there in Confluence pages for that. Yeah.
And that table of contents macro is very nice too. You can jump to anywhere on the page, which is super, super helpful because some pages just are longer than others.
Do you have any suggestions for how to walk and chew gum at the same time? With regardless of we've got probably 8 to 10 years of Confluence spaces and pages that don't follow what I would say are principles and best principles and guidelines that you have here, but how do we transform basically what we're learning here and take advantage of the new templates without losing what we got? Spinning up a separate instance is, we can't find things then. So that's not really a good plan.
That's a hard one. Few, again, tips that you could use. If you want to transfer the content to a new space, we have shortcuts now within the space sidebar. So you could still reference some of the content in another space that is relevant, but have, again, the value of new space templates. Yeah, a lot of it does come down to like good gardening practices, like cleaning up outdated content. So that needs to also be a practice that's encouraged, within your team. Automation is a great way to set rules around what could be outdated, like if it's a time-boxed, like anything after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, however you define outdated for your team or for your company. Yeah, I would say leverage shortcuts if you're referencing content that can't be transferred over to a new space. Automation is another way. And yeah, also think about like what type of space needs to be kept and what doesn't. Yeah, that I think will go a long way in just like cleaning up your Confluence site.
Yeah, I was going to say archiving would be great there if you I don't know if you need people to have access to that content. Archiving doesn't delete it, so it would still be accessible, but just kind of clearing up the space a little bit and seeing if people are actually finding that content or looking for it, and then maybe later on down the line you delete it, but that's a really great way to just kind of clean things up really quickly.
Hi, I have a question around, around the overall strategy for spaces. So for example, you mentioned that it's better to have spaces versus just having a bunch of material nested in your hierarchy. So for example, right now, my space, we have our team, and we have also our technical documentation. All of that is in one space. And then also for everything from our initiatives. So, we've got some linking to wireframes and all of that, all in one space. Would you recommend from a strategy that it's better to break all of those out for searching capabilities, et cetera?
I can take that. Classic problem, like you get space bloat after a certain point in time. Honestly, that's something that I've experienced because we use our own products as well. So there was a point where one of the team spaces just became so big. We had also grown so that there were like multiple sub-teams created. Like I mentioned earlier, having shortcuts to, again, reference pages in other spaces is a good practice. But specifically to your question, what is the best practice to kind of restructure that site so that the content is searchable? Again, it's not one over the other, because nesting pages has, again, its own value. We know a lot of customers use a page kind of like a folder where they use the page properties, child page display macro to just surface all the pages that are grouped together in this one kind of page folder. So that is also, and it does have its own value, but it's really about not going beyond this X level of hierarchy, which a good rule of thumb is 6. But in terms of searching, I don't think whether you have a page within one space or it's flatter in another, just blanket searching, it'll still give you the results. But in terms of navigating for the user, that can be very painful if they're navigating and they have to click multiple, on multiple pages and try to make sense of where it is. One hack to that is, as we shared, using a search macro within your space and keeping it in the overview so that they know, okay, if the sidebar is unruly, at least I can, by the page title or author, I can search.
I think too, depending on how people are using that content, how big your team is, how much content you have there, just referencing 2 things that Shaziya mentioned. So recognition over recall, it's probably a little bit easier to quickly find a space that has all the technical documentation than to go through a page tree and child pages and find technical documentation and then have to find the page that you're looking for. And then also the, I can't remember what it was called, but the, the boundaries, people perceive things that are within the same boundary as related. And so if you put everything in that one space, I think you have to think about how people are using the tool and how they're accessing that content. And if you group them together, they will just subconsciously think that they're somehow related. So if there are documents that are related that you want people to know are related, whether that's team plans or technical documentation, that's how you could really think about if you decided to breaking them out into different spaces.